The year was 1886. Out past the low hills of Nebraska Territory, where the land rolled on like an old hymn and the sky was too wide for hiding, a woman named Lenora stood at the edge of a train platform with nothing but a suitcase and silence for company. She wore a blue dress that had once belonged to her mother, faded at the shoulders, hem let down twice. Her gloves were second-hand, her hope brand new. And though she stood tall, her heart beat slow and wary, like someone who'd been brave too many times before. Lenora had come west on the promise of a letter. It was written in a man's strong hand, seeking a wife of good faith and steady spirit. Colour no matter, only kindness. She had read it 3 times, then folded it beneath her pillow, daring to believe for the first time in years that maybe she wouldn't be judged for the skin she wore, the shape of her body, or the silence she carried when rooms turned cruel. But when she stepped down from the train, the man who'd written the letter looked up and walked away. No explanation, no greeting. Just a single sentence tossed over his shoulder like a stone in the dust. "You didn't say you were coloured." And just like that, the dream broke. Lenora stood there for a long time after the crowd had scattered. Long enough for the wind to lift the edge of her skirt. Long enough for the porter to ask softly if she had someone coming to fetch her. She shook her head. "No, sir," she whispered. "Seems I don't." But what Lenora didn't know, what the man who rejected her never thought to imagine, was that someone had seen her that day, from across the road beside a tall white horse under the shade of a sugar pine. A man named Barrett Cole watched her with eyes like stormlight and sorrow. A man who'd built half this town with his own 2 hands. A man who'd buried a wife once and a part of himself with her. He didn't know her name yet, didn't know why his breath had caught when he saw her hands trembling, holding the handle of that worn suitcase like it was the only thing tethering her to this world. But he'd find out, because something in Lenora's quiet strength, something in the way she didn't cry, didn't chase, didn't collapse, made him remember what grace looked like in motion. Have you ever been looked at like you didn't belong when all you ever wanted was to be seen as someone worth choosing? Stay with us, because what happens next isn't about pity or rescue or revenge. It's about a love that comes slowly, but stays forever. And it starts here with a woman the world tried to overlook and a man who finally saw her. The morning sun in Birch Hollow didn't rise with fanfare. It simply arrived soft and steady, warming the red rock cliffs and waking the town without permission. Amara Bell rose with it, brushing the creases from her skirt, straightening her hat with practiced dignity. She hadn't slept much, but that wasn't new. Some burdens learn to settle into your bones, and sleep had never quite shaken them out. She had no plan, just the same coin she'd tucked into her boot for emergencies, and the name she'd carried in her heart for weeks, a name that had already turned its back. But fate had one more name to offer. "Ma'am," came a voice low and warm like coffee left on the stove. "You looking for breakfast or direction?" Amara turned slowly. The man was older than she expected, 40s perhaps. Weathered but not worn down. His boots were scuffed, his jacket a bit frayed at the cuffs. But his eyes didn't flinch. "I'm not begging," she said softly. "I didn't ask if you were." She studied him, one brow rising. "You were watching last night." He nodded. "Town's not so big you can disappear. Most folks pretend not to see. I've learned to do the opposite." Amara tilted her chin. "Why?" "Because someone once saw me when I was worth less than nothing," he said simply, "and it changed my life." He extended a gloved hand. "Leland Avery. I run the Bar A Ranch a few miles north." She shook it. Firm, respectful. Amara Bell. He didn't react to her name, didn't let go too quickly or too long. Just right. "There's a woman runs the inn," he said. "Keeps a spare room for working guests. I could cover a few days if you'd like time to decide your next steps." Amara frowned. "Why would you do that?" Leland shrugged eyes, kind. "Because the way that man left you yesterday, it ain't right. You came here on good faith. I reckon someone ought to offer the same back." Amara studied him again. There was no pity in his posture, no sly smile, just steadiness. "I don't take charity," she said. "It wouldn't be," he answered. "But I won't push." She hesitated, then nodded just once. At the inn, Miss Hattie, plump, practical, and unconcerned with town gossip, welcomed her with a room smelling faintly of lavender and lemon soap. Amara bathed, ate, wrote a single line in her worn journal, "Not everyone looks away." Later that week, Leland returned, not with questions, just with a bundle of apples and a quiet request. "The ranch cook broke her arm. We're down 2 hands. I know it's not what you came here for, but you're sharp. I could use someone like you for a spell. Nothing owed." Amara looked at him for a long time. She'd crossed states chasing a promise. This wasn't what she'd come for. But maybe it was what she needed. "I'll come," she said, "but not as a guest." "No," he agreed, smiling just a little, as someone worth her salt. And that was how Amara Bell came to the Barra Ranch, not by marriage, not by pity, but by her own choosing. Have you ever found yourself on a path you never planned, but one that felt more like home than anything before? Because sometimes reunion isn't with a person, it's with a part of yourself you forgot to believe in. The bar. A ranch wasn't built for comfort, it was built for work. And Amara Bell worked. She didn't need to be told twice. By the second morning, she'd learned how to manage the cooking fire in the drafty kitchen, patched 2 shirts for the ranch hands, and organized the root cellar shelves until every jar stood like a soldier on parade. She moved with purpose, not urgency. Quiet, but never invisible. The men at the ranch had noticed, not with leering eyes or whispered judgments. Leland didn't hire those kinds, but with a respect that had nothing to do with her shape or skin and everything to do with how she carried herself. Still, Amara kept a line around her soft but firm, one she rarely crossed even when the cabin started to feel less like a stopover and more like a pause that wanted to stretch. Leland watched her, from a distance, the same way a man might study a field after years of drought, unsure if anything could grow again. One evening after supper, he lingered by the porch rail while Amara gathered the dishes. "You always keep everything so neat," he said softly. "Comes from having nothing to waste," she replied without looking up. He didn't respond at first. Then in a voice touched with something tender, "You talk like someone who's lost more than once." Amara met his eyes. "And you don't?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've buried 2 brothers. Held my father's ranch together with spit and luck. Love once, but it died with her 10 winters back. I'm sorry." "Don't be," he said gently. "Just means I know what quiet grief looks like." They stood there, the stars climbing above them. Somewhere in the dark a coyote yipped. "I'm not staying," she said suddenly, voice tight. "This ain't my life." Leland didn't flinch. "All right, I mean it. I'm not here to be anyone's stray." "I know." She turned to go, but his next words stopped her like a hand at the elbow. "But you're not a stray, Miss Bell. You're a woman who's still holding her dignity when most would have dropped it miles back. That's no small thing." She paused at the door, didn't thank him, didn't argue, just closed it softly behind her. That night, Amara lay awake in the narrow bed listening to the wind press against the walls. She'd told herself she didn't care what anyone thought, that all she needed was to survive. But somehow, Leland's quiet regard felt heavier than rejection, not because it hurt, because it made her wonder if she deserved to be seen like that. Have you ever felt pulled between the life you fought to survive and the tenderness you didn't dare hope for? Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't being alone, it's realizing you don't have to be. Up until now, what have you felt watching Amara's journey unfold? Was it sorrow when she stood alone at the train station with nothing but her name, and a letter that didn't welcome her? Was it quiet strength when she refused pity and chose dignity instead? Or maybe something stirred in you when Leland saw her not as a burden, but as a woman worth listening to. Because what happens when someone used to silence starts to hear their name spoken with care? In the next part, the walls between them will tremble, and choices will need to be made not out of fear, but out of truth. What would you do if someone finally saw your heart before they ever asked for your hand? The sun beat down steady across the Wyoming plain, baking the red dust into the porch floorboards of Leland Shaw's ranch house. Inside, the air was cooler shaded but not quiet. Not today. Amara sat at the wooden table, hands wrapped around a chipped mug the steam of strong coffee rising and curling like breath she hadn't let out yet. Across from her, Leland stood near the window, his thumb brushing along the rim of his hat, eyes cast out toward the barn, but his thoughts were with her. He hadn't said much since yesterday, since she told him the whole story, about the Reverend's son back in Georgia, about the promises he made, the child she carried for 6 months, and the grave that marked what never had a chance to grow. Leland hadn't flinched, not once, but he hadn't spoken either. And now, as the silence stretched long between them, Amara felt that old ache creep in, the one that whispered, "See, they always change when they know who you really are." She stood slowly, voice gentle but clear. "If this changes anything I understand." Leland turned then, his expression unreadable but not cold. "It doesn't change you." Amara blinked. "But it might change how you see me." "I don't see less," he said. "I see more. You've walked through fire and came out holding your head up. That's not shame. That's strength." He stepped closer slowly, as if approaching a skittish colt. "But I reckon it might change. How you see me." She tilted her head, uncertain. "I'm not a good man, Amara," he said softly. "Not always. I've made mistakes, buried people, watched brothers die in war and turned cold because it was easier than feeling anything." Amara's voice came like rain on parched earth. "You're kind." He shook his head. "No, I'm just trying to unlearn what kept me alive too long." They stood there, truth sitting between them like a warm lantern. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the door. Firm, measured. Leland opened it, and on the other side stood Sheriff Ebb Whitaker, hat low, jaw tight. "Mornin', Leland." "Sheriff." Ebb glanced at Amara, and his eyes narrowed just a touch. "Heard some things in town. Thought I'd come out and see for myself." Leland didn't budge. "You're standing on my land. Say what you came to say." Whitaker tipped his hat back. "Folks are talking. Say you got a woman up here that don't belong." Amara's fingers gripped the edge of the table, but she didn't move. "I didn't realize kindness required approval," Leland said flatly. The sheriff shifted. "You know how it is. The board of trustees down at the co-op don't take kindly to trouble. They're watching." Leland crossed his arms. "They've watched plenty. Never lifted a hand to help when folks went hungry." "I'm not here to start anything," Whitaker said. "But you're not exactly invisible in this town, Leland, and she sure as hell ain't." Silence followed. Leland spoke, voice low. "You tell the trustees, if they're more worried about skin than character, they can come say it to my face. But if they touch one hair on her head, I'll burn their name off every post and gate they've built." The sheriff swallowed and nodded. "Just doing my duty." "No," Leland said. "You're doing their bidding." Whitaker left without another word. After the door shut, Amara exhaled slowly. "That's going to cost you." Leland nodded. "Maybe, but silence would have cost me more." They didn't talk much that night. The sky turned purple and soft above the ranch, and inside the small house Amara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering whether her presence here would ruin the only peace she'd ever known. Would it be better if she left? She slipped outside barefoot on the cool porch wood, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Leland was already there, pipe unlit in one hand, watching the stars. "I can't be the reason your life gets harder," she said quietly. "You're not," he answered. "You're the reason it started to matter again." She looked at him, eyes shining in the dark. "But it hurts, Leland," she whispered. "Every kindness feels like it's on borrowed time, like someone's going to come along and remind me I don't belong." He was quiet a moment. "Then, Amara, don't confuse being hated with being wrong." That's silence again, but this time it held something sacred. "You've got a choice," he said. "Run from what made you, or stay and build something better." Her voice cracked, but she asked anyway, "Would you build it with me?" His answer came with no hesitation. "I already started." And there it was. Not love yet. Not quite. But the clearing of the ground where love could grow. They found a clearing just wide enough for truth to breathe. But will the world let them build something in it? And what happens when the ghosts of Amara's past Return not to haunt, but to test. Stay with us, as a woman who's long been silenced dares to speak and be heard. The sky above Stillwater Ridge that morning was wide and cloudless, but inside Selma's chest a storm had begun to clear. It wasn't rage, it wasn't even sadness anymore. It was something quieter and far more powerful. It was resolve. After their talk in the orchard, she'd spent the night awake, staring at the ceiling of her small room, tracing the cracks in the wood above her like fault lines in her past. Every slur, every shameful silence, every lie she'd believed about herself began to unravel like a too-tight corset finally unbound. She thought of the girls back at the colored school in Mississippi, how they'd braided each other's hair and whispered dreams into the humid air. She thought of her mama's hands worn raw from scrubbing for people who never said thank you. She thought of the preacher who called her spoiled goods when she ran from the man who tried to own her. And then she thought of Beau, of the way he listened without trying to fix, the way he looked at her like she wasn't broken. So when the morning sun rose, Selma dressed not for hiding but for planting. Out in the garden she tied back her scarf, rolled up her sleeves and began clearing the weeds by the back fence. The dirt under her fingernails felt holy. The sky above her didn't judge. For once she wasn't shrinking, she was standing. Around mid-morning, Beau returned from town with a small sack of seed and a box under his arm. He found her on her knees, sleeves, dusty cheeks flushed with heat and effort. "Didn't expect you out here this early," he said gently. "I needed to work," she answered, wiping her brow. Beau set the box down beside her. "Brought something for you." She opened it and blinked. Inside was a set of carving tools, small and beautifully crafted. Alongside it, a stack of smooth cedar panels. "You told me once you used to paint. Thought maybe your hands still remembered how to create." She stared at the gift tears welling, not because it was extravagant, but because it meant he'd been listening. Really listening. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what to say." "You already said it," Beau replied, "every time you didn't give up." Later, as they worked side by side, their fingers brushed briefly. Neither pulled away. By afternoon, the first rows of seedlings were in the ground, and as Selma stood back and looked at the soil, still rough, still scarred, she saw something beautiful, a beginning. She turned to Beau. "I've been waiting all my life for someone to choose me. But I think I was supposed to choose myself first." Beau's eyes softened. Maybe that's the only way love ever works. That night, Selma carved her first image on a panel of cedar. It was a woman tall and strong holding a lantern in the dark, not waiting to be found, but lighting the way herself. She signed it simply S. Dalton, not Selma the runaway, not Selma the girl left at the train station, but Selma the woman who stayed, the woman who reclaimed her name. Have you ever had to fight just to feel like you belong in your own skin? What if the very soil that tried to bury you became the ground where you started to grow? Stay with us. The next part will test everything Selma has come to believe about herself about love, and what she's willing to risk to keep it. The calm after clarity didn't last long. By the end of the week, word had spread across Stillwater Ridge like wildfire in dry grass. First a whisper at the feed store, then a mutter at Sunday service. By Monday, it was a full-blown reckoning. "They say he's keeping her at the ranch. A colored mail-order girl out there with him. She's probably after his land." Mark my words. Selma had heard whispers her whole life, but this was different. This was a town sharpening its knives not out of curiosity but fear. Fear of change. Fear of seeing dignity where they'd been taught to see shame. She walked into town with her chin up anyway. Needed thread soap, a few garden seeds. Nothing more. But the general store door barely creaked before silence fell. The kind that sinks teeth into skin. Mrs. Lathrop, the preacher's wife, stood stiff at the counter. Her gaze ran up and down Selma's frame like a judge weighing a case she'd already decided. "I believe you've mistaken this place for one that serves your kind," she said without blinking. Selma didn't flinch. "I'm here to buy seed, not history." "Mrs." Lathrop's mouth twitched. "History walks with you, girl. Like it or not." Behind Selma, a man cleared his throat. She turned and there was Beau. He hadn't followed her into town. She hadn't asked him to, but somehow he'd known. "I think that's enough," Beau said quietly. Not angry, just settled. Mrs. Lathrop turned on him. "Beau Ridgway, you're a man of standing. How long before she soils what you've built?" Beau stepped forward. "She hasn't soiled a thing. She's planted, worked, bled on my land, same as I have, more than most here." "She's a coloured woman," the preacher's wife hissed. "No name, no family, no right. She has my name if she wants it," Beau said. And just like that, the room went silent again. This time, breathless. Selma blinked. Beau didn't look at her when he said it. He looked ahead out the window, like he wasn't saying it to impress, just stating a fact the world would now have to reckon with. Selma touched his arm, gently, not to stop him, but to tell him she heard him, truly heard. They left together, arms not linked, but steps aligned. Outside, Selma paused on the porch. "You didn't need to defend me." Beau shrugged. Didn't feel like defense. Felt like truth. She smiled, small and tired, but real. "You just offered me your name. I didn't mean it for show. I know. That's why it means something." That night back at the ranch, the wind howled through the eaves like an old warning, but Selma didn't feel afraid. Not this time. She knew now the storm wasn't just outside, it had been inside her too. But Beau's words had steadied her, not because they fixed her, but because they reflected her, like a mirror held up gently in the light. She stepped into the parlour where he sat by the fire polishing an old boot. "You sure you want this?" she asked. "The talk, the fights, the cost of loving me out loud." Beau looked up, set the boot aside. "I want what makes my life honest," he said. "That's you." And in that quiet room, with nothing but wind outside and warmth inside, Selma did something rare. She believed him. What does it mean to be chosen not in secret, not in silence, but in full view of the world that once rejected you? In the next chapter, Selma must decide whether to let her wounds define her future, or to walk toward a love brave enough to hold her whole story. Spring arrived late in Stillwater Ridge that year. The soil took its time softening. Snow clung stubbornly to fence posts. Even the crows seemed reluctant to move on. But on the Ridgway Ranch, something had already started blooming. It wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of blooming that made people stop and marvel. It was quiet, like Selma herself. She stood in the back garden sleeves, rolled hands in earth, planting herbs she hadn't touched since Louisiana. The rosemary was for strength, the lavender for sleep, and the thyme, well, that was for courage. Behind her, the porch creaked. She turned. Beau stood there holding something behind his back. He stepped forward, shy in a way she hadn't seen before, almost boyish. "I had this made," he said. "Took weeks." From behind his back, he pulled out a carved wooden plaque. Simple, smooth, stained the colour of walnut. Burned into the centre were 3 words, "The Ridgway Homestead," and beneath in careful script, "Beau and Selma, 1890. Selma stared at it, eyes wide, then soft, then glassy. "You didn't ask?" she said. "No," Beau replied. Didn't need to. He handed it to her, but it wasn't just a gift. It was an offering. A door swung open, a place where she wasn't tolerated. She was named. She traced the letters with one calloused finger, then looked up, a question trembling in her throat. "Are you sure?" "I've never been sure of anything," Beau said. "You've made this place grow again. The land and me." She laughed, a sound full of gratitude and disbelief. "You sure it's not just the pie?" He smiled. "Might have been the pie at first. But you stayed. You showed up when others walked away. You looked this place in the eye and saw something worth tending. That's not small, Selma. That's mighty." She pressed the plaque to her chest, holding it close like something sacred. That night, under a wide sky full of stars that looked a little closer than usual, they sat on the porch together. No declarations, no grand ceremony, just hands folded quietly between them, and the sound of the world catching its breath. Selma turned to him. "Do you ever think the people who left missed the best parts of us?" Beau thought for a moment. "Maybe. Or maybe they only saw what they were told to see. Either way, they're not here now. And we are. She nodded. That's enough for me. Across the hills, spring whispered through the cottonwoods, and Selma exhaled long and low. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't carrying her story alone. Not rewritten, but fully told. The fire had burned low by the time Lenora leaned her head on Barrett's shoulder. Outside, the prairie slept under moonlight, quiet and unbothered. Inside, two people once broken by rejection, now mended by trust, sat close enough to feel each other's breath and not fear being too much. There were no wedding bells that night, no parades or headlines, just peace. And sometimes peace is the greatest love story of all, because in a world that often looks right past women, like Lenora, too dark, too full, too quiet, too much, she had finally been seen by a man who didn't need her to be anything less to feel whole. He didn't rescue her, he made room for her. And in doing so, they both found what neither had dared to name out loud, a home not made of walls but of welcome. Friend, maybe you've known what it's like to feel unseen. Or maybe you've had to carry your dignity quietly through rooms that couldn't hold your fullness. If this story stirred something in your heart, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of Lenora's journey reminded you of your own? Leave a comment below. And if you'd like more stories like this, stories that start in silence and end in strength, subscribe to None, Wild West Saga. Share this video with someone who still believes in soft love's second chances and finding belonging without changing who you are. Because sometimes being too much is exactly what makes you just right.